I think we will be starting. Happy to have everyone this evening and this afternoon. I essentially want to start with a quick intro of myself and the company, just for all of you to know that I'm qualified to basically speak on the topic and present the second speaker of ours. I would essentially do this as well. My name is Ten Sarchuk. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Interexy. We are 150 plus engineers company. We're headquartered in Florida. We have offices in Poland and Estonia, and we have the entity in Dubai, in UAE, where I'm essentially based right now. We're providing Web3 custom blockchain development and tech consulting services. We have around 50 to 60 clients in parallel. Currently, we're mostly focusing on the United States, Western Europe, and UAE as well. We grow at least 3 times each year. And only last year, our clients were able to raise 180 million plus from the products that we either built for them from scratch or that we're working on with them within their internal teams, helping them to essentially reach those targets. We're also an Upwork operated agency. We have 33 clutch reviews with an average mark of 4.9. And we work a lot with a range of companies in Web3, and not only Web3. I would say that like Web3 is around 40 to 50% of the business. We focus on some other industries as well, such as healthcare, and like we do some projects in business consulting and like general like custom software development as well. As mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of the company. I'm an iOS software engineer in the first place. I am a huge enthusiast in blockchain investor myself, and I have essentially a couple of crypto related projects that I do on the sides. On this side, I would say it's businesses currently as well. We have like overall number here. So we would have Domi, who would be presented at the second part of the call with us as well. He's one of our blockchain engineers. He's also based in Dubai. He was working with us on largest NFT drops that we were behind this year. One of them was for Lil Durk, the American rapper with 13 million followers, where Gary Vee was involved as well, and essentially on a range of other projects with very, very nice and interesting startups and companies in the US and Western Europe as well. So during the webinar, we would have 2 parts. I would cover the first one, and Dami would be covering the second one from his end as well. The first part is the correct way to estimate blockchain development project timelines, which is essentially separated into 5 different parts: initial overview, potential pitfalls during estimation, tech limitations and blockers, security, scalability and stability, and the conclusion of my part and my talk as well. This would go from the experience of mine working on the projects. I'm constantly speaking with VCs in the region as well, with different startups that are developing Web3, very large amount of people, I would say. And we essentially have a lot of feedback and a lot of experience of how we do this as well, and how we see that other companies either thrive or fail in activities like that. It's not only going to be like about exactly like project timelines, but in some other things as well. And Domi, from his end, he would essentially cover the second part, which would be definitely more technical than mine essentially. So initial overview of the product and discovery process. Why it's complicated to estimate a project right away, especially blockchain one. Discovery process counts across freelancers, agencies working without a discovery process, what blockchain to choose, and man-hours approach. So I would cover both approaches, where you are either working with your internal team by yourself and you have some engineers that you're working with, or basically if you're looking to get a development agency on board, or if you're already like working with someone, or you're basically actively shopping around, I would be able to cover essentially these parts as well. So initial overview, essentially very, very important to have someone on the same page when someone is working with you on the same thing. In the case of third-party agencies, you would probably often meet consultants and salespeople that just push stuff like very, very hard, and like you can see that they're not very, very interested in essentially getting to understand like your problem, what exactly you're trying to solve, and really understand like why it's important to you. Because like we always try to understand what type of goals you're trying to achieve with the build of the product, because essentially building MVP that is going to be rebuilt once the client is going to fundraise, and building like a fully functional MVP that we were going to develop and continue developing after the fundraising event is a very, very like different tech tasks, I would say, and they should definitely be approached in a different in a different manner as well. And we have like different things like timelines, like in demands from investors, demands of the markets, limitations of technology, focus on what type of user experience you essentially would want to have, and what type of audience you would want to focus on. Like a range, huge range of different things that you should definitely be focusing on when speaking to someone, either your internal engineers or third-party company, making sure that you're on the same page on this. Why it's complicated to estimate the project right away, especially in blockchain one. So from that point of view, speaking of like a default Web2 development, you would always have different companies and different people involved in the process. You would have UI and UX designers, you would have QA people, you would have solutions architect, you would have DevOps, you would have engineers, you would have project managers, you would have tech leads that work on the product. And depending on the size of the project, it's pretty hard in certain cases to provide a fine and clear estimate. And what we see in the builds, especially if this is something from scratch, projects, they pivot a lot. Like we had projects that changed the whole concept from the way in comparison to essentially what they were at the launch stage. And even like best products that you can see on the marketplace, like Instagram and applications like that, they had way different ideas and concepts initially in comparison to what they're now, and with what they actually became a success as well. Blockchain part obviously adds a certain layer of complexity as well. In the first place, I would say the issue on the marketplace is that not many people really understand how the whole thing works, but they claim they do. And if you would essentially stumble, or if you would face with this person, if you would like start working with this engineer, or essentially the engineering company like that, you would probably waste a bunch of money and time during the actual development process somewhere down the road. And like the timelines, they might essentially get screwed up just following the behavior of the engineers that you're working with. So that's something that you should basically check on definitely. And in the interviewing process, if you're even like hiring for yourself, or if you're speaking with a third-party company, there are a list of certain basic questions, and it's always great to check out the basic understanding of blockchain, how the whole thing works. Not only like the person who you are speaking with mostly, but with each member of the team as well. Like if you have business analysts there, if you have a project manager, just ask them a thing or two just to get the understanding, the feeling. And this type of initial check, it would improve the success chance of the product over time frame, because it would essentially mean that people won't be learning based on your money only. So it's just basically to make sure to have the experts initially. Second stage is discovery process, the consent process. Discovery process is something that could and should be implemented in both ways. Either you're developing the products with your like internal team, or if you're speaking with a third-party agency. I think I would cover the part with the agencies in the point 3. If it's about your team, discovery process is essentially something that we call the activity of working on the technical specification of the product, outlining user epics, user stories, acceptance criteria for testing, working on the design, working on the data flow of the application, working on the architecture, and really coming up to one document where you have the whole thing documented and transparent, essentially, that would serve as a layer from product owners, which is you in this case, to engineers. It's this doc that would provide a lot of clarity. And in our case, that's like a default part of our process. An interesting thing that we saw with some of the clients of ours, they were able to even fundraise pre-seed rounds just with having like technical specification in place, because this is like signature to investors like right away that it's not like just a concept that like someone came up with yesterday. It's a pure technical document, and most of the companies, once you have it like properly in place, they would be able to provide you with a pretty good estimate, and even like your in-house people obviously as well. Once you have something like this and clearly defined and finalized, and it's also a nice like check-in moment, because if you're speaking with either like people you want to hire internally or like a third-party company, if you have a full finalized specification and you see that they're not getting too deep into the whole thing and like they're just on the high level things like that, that's also a red flag that should definitely be considered from your end. So following the experience, I think like over these years, we built more than 100 custom software development products from scratch, at least. From my end, I only see pros in the approach like this. The only huge disadvantage is if you would take too much time working on the specification. There is the book that essentially introduces Scrum process to the public, and it tells about government projects for FBI and essentially agencies like this in the US that was started in the end of 90s, start of the 2000s, that were at the stage of outline of the specification for years. And they were never able to basically finish with the development, because with each change in the process, with each new technology, they needed to rewrite like a certain part of the specification, and they had like part of like a range of rules to following that approach. So it's not very agile, especially for the startup environment. If you're not agile, you'll probably be dead with the startup in some time from now. So we had this problem inside the agency as well, since in some projects, we had cases where we used to write like software specification for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, in like worst cases, 6 months. And like it's not ideal that you would want for any project. And over time, we essentially switched that we start writing the software specification with the design for the first 2 to 3 weeks of the project, and then we start the development sprint right away. And the team that's working on tech specification and design, they focus on being just one sprint ahead of the development and the QA team. That essentially establishes that you're not like holding on with the development, you're already building the whole thing, but at the same time, you have overview of the full platform. So it definitely helps the process, and it definitely helps with beating the competition in the marketplace, because when your competition is working, you're not just like writing the specs, you're doing the development in the process as well. So I would say like that the major disadvantage that you might have in the process if you spend too much time working on it. And don't be afraid just going in, because yeah, like you would definitely pivot in the process anyway. Like there is no option, you would just finalize everything initially and it would stay initially. And that's an interesting part with the immutability of smart contracts and essentially this type of planning activities in Web3 space. And Domi would actually cover this part in the second part of the presentation as well. So third parties that are working without discovery process, to which you come with building a product from scratch, red flag right away. Be very, very careful with that. If they jump in straight away into development, they will probably waste a lot of time. They might not understand the product fully. they will definitely also waste money. So a company that's mature on the marketplace to a certain extent, a green flag would be that they have a discovery process. The more it's standardized, the more examples of previous projects they've done, technical specifications for, the more I would even say, like from the presentation point of view, if you really see that the person you're speaking to, like the business analyst, has done this like a bunch of times before, they know what to say, that they know what to ask, that's like a very, very good sign that you're in the right hands, essentially. What blockchain to choose? Also a very interesting part for any product with the integration of smart contracts of Web3, as following the goals of the product, if you choose wrong blockchain initially, it might make the picture worse over a long enough time frame. And often what you would find, it's always like worst case scenario, but it happens from time to time, is that you would be working on the products for several months, and then like you find out that you need to like rebuild the whole thing from scratch because blockchain has like certain limitations, or like you have this feature that's critical and you can't implement. And that's exactly things that you counter with proper discovery process and with proper blockchain expertise on the end of the development team, engineering team, on the end of the company that you're working with team. Not only the person you're speaking to, but people who would essentially be doing the work, like business analysts, project managers, QA people. Like if QA invest in blockchain and they have like a bunch of crypto wallets and they're constantly in Web3, I would say it's a very, very good sign as well. Man-hours approach is essentially the approach that's being used by most of the engineers and development companies out there. There is also like the approach of estimating everything in user story points, but I would say that's basically just the addition on the man-hours approach as well. So engineers, they just break down the products into functionalities, into features. So like, let's say we have homepage of the application, we have like a map there, we have a button to go into profile, we have like certain setups there and things like that. They basically just estimate how much time it would actually take to build the API on the like for the connection of the backend and front end, to essentially be able to implement the front end, to build business logic on the front end, to connect database on the back end. And they estimate everything in different parts, and then they essentially provide a final estimate as the sum of the amount of hours, and then they just multiply the amount of hours on the hourly rate. But with any estimate, I would always suggest to send it to several engineers, because you would always get a better understanding of the pricing on the market, where the party that you would want to go with essentially is. Is it like high, middle, low, and why? You would be able to ask them on that as well. And that's like a very, very proper thing to do in the process as well. Potential pitfalls during estimation: engineers underestimate or overestimate. So yeah, I would say that engineers, they tend to underestimate. They often basically just think from ideal case scenario and that everything is going to work well. And if your project is time sensitive, which a lot of projects are, it's always nice to have certain risks embedded into the estimate as well. And if you're working like with a third-party agency, they would often like have this process like internally as well. So they would never give you like the estimate that engineers provided themselves. They would always add like a certain range of risks into that. The overestimation, I would say, it happens if there is something in the process, like if engineer has some other projects that he's working on, if they want to charge more, if there is like untrustworthy third-party provider that wants to do like to basically charge more and things like that. But again, if you're using the exercise of sending the estimate to different engineers, different development parties, you would always be able to come to the one that you want to work with and ask them like why they have higher amount of hours and things like that. And they would usually often provide you with an answer that would cover the question, and you would understand a lot from the answer as well. Not counting in the risks, yeah, that mentioned, especially if these individual engineers, if these are your internal people, and if you're coming like from business background, not tech background, that's something to definitely focus on as well. Not counting in assumptions. So this is the part when you don't have like the full technical specification in place and you're basically already working on the product, or maybe like you're doing technical specification in parallel, but like certain parts they're not done, and like you're not sure about this or that integration. You need to schedule some calls with certain services to ask them about like APIs and how the whole thing works. So these assumptions, if it's like a time-sensitive project, a time-sensitive product, should definitely be counted as well in the risks. And yeah, like I would say a huge part of this process is managing the expectations, because the people that you're working with, they should definitely know things about timelines as well, and they should definitely be able to plan accordingly. Some things that we're doing with engineers that I think many people and many business owners and agencies in the business do, they tend to say that the timeline is actually less. So the whole thing would be finished faster, because there would still be like any like bug fixes and issues in the process improvements after the initial build. Communication, team management, and QA. So this is, yeah, also in both cases, if you're running your own team or if you are working with a third-party agency. Some of the agencies, they would have time for these activities embedded into the hourly rate of the engineer. Some of the agencies, that they would show you explicitly the amount of hours for these activities as well. If you're managing the team, you should definitely count this on as well. So I can say that like if you're working with an engineer, he has like 8 hours of working time a day. I would be focusing on more like 6 hours with all the communication, things like that, and some, I don't know, like news and coffee in the office and things like that. It's better to plan coming out of 6 hours of daily work if you're speaking of like a default full-time engineer who's working with you. Tech limitations and blockers. Tech limitation based on requirements. This is something that comes from the tech specs, and as well, you can either spend like too much time thinking of like every risk and everything that you might be able to face during the development, or you can basically probably just talk to someone who was doing something like this before, focus on main pitfalls, make sure that like main things are covered, and just go in and figure out everything else on the go as well, because as mentioned several times already, you would definitely have pivots in the process. On-chain and off-chain architecture solutions. This is the part that Domi would be covering from his end as well. From my end, I can add that there are differences in terms of how fast and how secure the solution is going to be, depending on on-chain and off-chain architecture solutions. If we're speaking about Web3 product developments, that's something that should be counted in. Usually it's been done on the architecture part of the build of the product. So usually somewhere at the beginning, and if you are either working with some engineers internally or you have some external third party, you should definitely demand from them, like just ask like what kind of things are going to be like purely on the blockchain, what kind of things we have in our own backend, so we can speed up certain processes and not call like data from the blockchain all the time, because it's pretty heavy and might make the whole application slow and not very secure often as well. Cost effectiveness, decentralization, speed, and security. So yeah, this is essentially like the issue of all like blockchain developments and all like blockchains, as they always balance out between cost effectiveness, decentralization, and security essentially. So depending on the product, you might be able during the architecture stage, speaking with your solutions architect, essentially be able to figure out what type of thing is the most important to you, and where you can like make the solution a bit more centralized, but get like more speed and some more interesting things in the process as well. So that's something to plan out in advance, definitely, and that would also depend on what type of blockchain you would essentially be choosing. What blockchain to choose? There are different options. Flow, for example, is good with NFT. ETH is the most secure ones because obviously there are a bunch of nodes and ETH holders. Polygon or BC is usually being used for games. Solana is great for like some play term projects and with NFTs as well. But the opinion that I'm essentially receiving recently from different parties is people tend to look at things from the marketing point of view. Because like with Stack, if you would work enough on a certain solution and if you're not coming with something like genius from scratch, you would often be able to implement it essentially on any blockchain. So that there are not too much things for like not too much reasons to choose like certain blockchain unless it's something like very specific for you. Like there are obviously like difference in commissions and everything, and if you're doing an NFT drop and you don't want people to have huge gas commissions, you might and you still like want the collection to be present in OpenSea, you might choose not ETH but Polygon. But at the same time, it might be a bit worse for the marketing because on Polygon people would probably be minting less, and like the auditory, the people with money are on ETH at the same time. So yeah, it's an interesting like trade-off that you would be doing from project to project. And Dom, I think, would also help with that as well. Blockchain expertise of providing party. So yeah, if it's a third party or if it's essentially internal engineers, these things, they should be planned in advance. And that's why you should be very transparent with what kind of things you would like to achieve and what kind of things essentially you're planning to do. Because in some cases, like clients, they might be not very clear about like marketing plans or fundraising plans. They don't see a reason why they should share this information with the engineering provider. But as engineers ourselves, that might be very important data on how to approach the project, because again, depending on what variables you have, we would be constructing the solution accordingly. As with certain budgets, like many different things could be done. Like with like a 200K project is going probably to be like way different from 600K project if we're speaking of the same like platform build, depending on the goals and depending essentially on the status of the project itself. Security, scalability, and stability. Yeah, so that's essentially something that you're balancing out as well and trading on as well. Yeah, I think this slide is, sorry. Yeah, apologies. So conclusion, in terms of the general approach of the estimate, yeah, just have different discussions with different people. Try to put concepts initially. If it's like first time for you, try to check out for technical specifications on the web and create something similar. Often basically like a 3 to 5 pages doc with just overview of like concepts and functionalities and market of the product is going to be enough for the engineers to start with the estimation process and with at least asking questions in the process. Go to different estimation parties as well. If you have in-house engineers, just give the estimate to several of them, or maybe give it to in-house engineers and to some third parties as well. And follow the man-hours approach, as this like it's the standard that most of the companies essentially use in this space. So break down the product to small features. Small features are easy to estimate for the engineers because they probably were doing them a bunch of times already. And then just estimate feature one by one, sum the whole thing up, add communication, QA, project management, add risks into the process, add assumptions, then compare your estimate with different estimates on the market, ask questions regarding the places where you have differences and why you have differences. And if you would essentially be following the approach all on that, I would say that in 80 to 90% cases, you would be getting quite sharp estimates eventually. counting all pitfalls in, that's something. If you really want to be secure and kind of like get this last 20% out, you would want to do like a full technical specification with the design, with the overview of user epics and user stories. That would help with the whole process. Caring a lot about architecture on chain, off-chain speed and security. Blockchain part, very important, as there might be cases where you're working on the solution for quite some time and then you basically need to redo the whole thing from scratch. Expertise of a provider's main differentiator of Web3 product success. That's huge. That's a lot as well. Even in estimating process, in consulting process, during the whole development, during like often the launch of the project as well. Because if we're speaking of like some type of NFT drops, engineer with a lot of experience would be able to provide you with a lot of feedback on how to do things in the right way, depending on the circumstances. That's essentially it from my end of the presentation. You have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. And after this second part, we would have a Q&A session as well. Part 2 is issues you face with when development Web3 product. And Domi, I think it's your turn.
Great. So I guess I'll start with a little introduction of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm a developer myself, so I'm going to be talking about similar things to what Stan said, but from the developer perspective. So when you're working on a blockchain project, especially if you're one of the front-end, back-end, or contract developers, the actual developer experience differs quite significantly as if you'd be developing a normal application. There are 4 main reasons. The first main reason is due to how quote-unquote new the technology is. Whenever you encounter a problem, which you will pretty much every single 15 minutes, if you're working on any worthy project, you're not going to be able to get any help from any sort of community or any sort of website, or you can't just Google up your bugs. You won't get anything because the actual developer community isn't saturated enough so that they would actually share this sort of information. It's very, very hard to get anything useful out of anybody else. So you're stuck having to experiment with yourself, which gets me to your next point. Within normal projects, let's say you're doing a normal web app or a mobile app, most patterns have already been established that they are very, very good patterns, and there's no point trying to experiment, find better things. There's a library you can use. There's an open source protocol which does most of the heavy lifting for you, and they are good things to use because it has been proven through many projects that they are very, very scalable. They're very safe to use. Therefore, you can and you should just use them. With blockchain projects, since this community of developers hasn't really shared most of their work yet, these things aren't really available, which means there's a lot more room for actual experimentation. You can sit there and even with just a simple contract, you can try 5-6 different things and compare which one's the most gas efficient. Therefore, there's a lot more time involved, even in very, very simple things, because there isn't a best proven way yet. A lot of things keep changing constantly. The biggest change, I guess, in the NFT field was the 721A contract from Azuki. That was just another thing. People just sat down, Azuki's devs, and throughout a couple months, they managed to crack together a much, much more optimized version of the 721 standard. And even now, it's still being developed further. So there's still lots of experimentation and there's lots of room to do things. You can never really sit and call anything done because it's very, very hard to estimate if it has been done or not. The next thing is there are very, very few amount of actual really good smart contract developers out there. And the learning curve for on-chain Solidity development, or let it be Rust or Teal or whatever you'd like to use, it's very easy to get into on a very high level. But if you'd actually like to do some of the more complex things, it's a very, very steep downfall. Therefore, it's very easy to get confused between someone says they have written a couple of contracts or if they're actually very, very good at what they do. So it's very easy to encounter with someone who has even a couple of good notable projects that have been on chain for a couple of years and they're running fine, but the actual dev has no idea of the things that you would be developing with him or her, because as I said, a lot of very surface level things which can be learned very quickly. But the people that are very, very good, they are all self-taught, which gets me to my next point is there is no good resource to learn from as a developer. That's part of the reason why there are very few really good ones is there's not a single good resource that you can use to be able to learn or pick something up really, really quickly. It's all just experimentation and a lot of personal projects. And therefore, it's very, very hard to measure one person's ability in what they can do with this, because someone can have a lot of projects, but they are still on the surface level, or somebody can have very few amount of projects, but they're very, very deep and complex. Therefore, it's very hard to measure one's ability and how would they perform on the job just from a quick overview. And the next thing is Stan mentioned that the immutability of contracts, which is a huge differing point of view. With on-chain development, if you actually choose to put things on-chain, it's very, very hard to change them. There are upgradable contracts. There are several things, but they don't work as people assume how they work. It's not like you just push a new change to Git and then everything just gets redeployed. So you can never redeploy the same smart contract with different code base. You'd have to deploy a new one. And with most things, so for example, on a DeFi project, it's an economic suicide to do that, because you'd have to move all the liquidity, you'd have to move all the stake, the pointers and everything. It's very hard to execute flawlessly, especially that everything on the blockchain is a mini economy. Even things when there is no funds, anybody can just set up a DEX on anything that at least somewhat matches the ERC20 standard. So you have to treat anything as a mini economy on the blockchain, and it's just not good for it. Therefore, especially when you're developing a larger project, the discovery phase is especially important to understand not just the short, but the long-term goals as well, because the contracts, even the ones that you're just using for the MVP, will have to be constructed in a way that they will allow for the further expansions and other plans that you may have within the future. Otherwise, if nothing is mentioned, then the dev will just most probably try to optimize for the current view of the project.
Baby.
Because as I said, there's never enough time. There's never too much time you can spend on a contract, since you will never be able to redeploy it. If it can get drained, it will most probably likely will get drained. People spend a lot of time trying to drain contracts. That's why there are lots of huge hacks. There are lots of really large teams who spend their entire day and night just trying to drain things. First of all, there's lots of reward. Second, it was very hard to actually trace where the money went. Even though mixers don't really exist anymore, they're just a small roadblock. And because it's so a low barrier of entry and so little risk, as I said, if it can get drained, it most probably will get drained. So as a good rule of thumb, I like to spend twice as much time testing as developing, which means you should spend 1/3 of the time development. Let's say it's a normal on-chain protocol. And then you should spend the other 2/3 of your time testing what you've just built. With tests, you can split them up several ways. I usually make minimum one unit test per function. Make sure to isolate the unit tests from each other to make sure that everything runs in an environment where the state changes of other functions will not interfere. Therefore, it's so much easier to see where things go wrong if they do. And at the end, it's a good idea to have an end-to-end test as well, or integration tests, but that's if you have a DApp in the end. So have an end-to-end test where instead of running isolated environments, you shove everything into one environment and see the global state changes across the entire contract or contracts. The actual estimations of a blockchain project can be split into two categories. So there are two types of blockchain projects. One that is an actual on-chain project, or there's a project that just uses blockchain in some way. If it's a project that just uses blockchain in some way, it is probably not a good idea to even have a Solidity developer on the team, since the actual majority of the development will be backend development. There'll be very, very little on-chain development. Therefore, it's a waste of resource. So if it's just, for example, an NFT marketplace, the contracts for NFT marketplaces have been standard for years. You don't really change a lot of things unless you're going to be very, very specific there with what you're going to do. And you're going to spend majority of your time setting up the backend and the actual infrastructure for the NFT marketplace, which is all just normal backend and front-end UI work. If it's an actual on-chain protocol, like let's say a DEX, or somewhat even of centralized exchanges can be counted in this way, or an actual on-chain NFT marketplace, unlike OpenSea or some sort of other protocol, then each every single task should be split into, instead of estimating with time, since, as I said, it's most likely that it has never been done before. Therefore, it's very, very hard to estimate how long it will take, because there's so many experimentations you can do, and there's so many experimentations you should do to be able to find the most optimized scenario and the most optimized bytecode for that specific function. Because if things get too expensive, then users just want to use the actual protocol, and then it was a waste of development. Everything will have to be backwards and forwards compatible for the future, because the contracts, as I said, immutable, which means they stay there forever. So they have to work with things that are already on chain, and you have to try to structure it in a way that is going to work with all the things that could be on chain later on. So because of this, instead of saying X amount of days or X amount of hours, it's best to split them into 3 categories. So let's say one task should be try to put a number on the task's complexity, the task effort, and the confidence you have in the figures you just gave. So let's say it's a simple, NFT contract. Then it's very low complexity, but it's still high effort because the testing will have to be done. So complexity is basically how difficult it is to develop that side of the section. And the difficulty should be measured is, can a junior dev do it, or does it need a senior dev for it? The effort is just simply compared to other tasks. How long will this take? Not an actual number, just compared to the other ones. Would this take less or would this take long? And confidence is basically like risk or confidence. How likely is it that the 2 figures just gave is accurate at all? So going back to the example, a simple NFT contract, very low complexity, but still high effort. It will still take quite a lot of time compared to other tasks, because you cannot skip the testing. So timelines will still take quite low, and confidence is very high since it has been done many times. So you know that your figures won't be off. But let's say building forking Uniswap and trying to, I don't know, build a V4 for its router, then it's very high complexity. The effort compared to the other task is quite low, but its confidence is very low as well. And then from that, you'll be able to give a much better understanding of what are the sort of tasks that will take longer or will take shorter. And I'd like to just give a flat rate of how long it's going to take the entire project rather than each task, because you can get stuck on one task, testing it for days and seeing if it will work or not. I think that's what I'd like to talk about on a high level on this topic. So I'm done here.
All right. Thank you, Domi. Yeah, so I think we're moving into the, yeah. All right. So this part, we essentially have done and are working on a range of Web3 projects at this stage, ranging from like NFT drops and NFT marketplaces, ending with complex real estate tokenization problems, and helping some layer ones to essentially come up into the Web3 and blockchain space. We have experience with DeFi, centralized exchanges, decentralized exchanges. We work with gamified projects. We've been trying to do like our own play turn title, so have some experience there as well. So pretty much range of things in Web3. We are custom software development company, so we break down everything in terms of the requests that come to us, to small pieces, and when we focus on them each and time, essentially solving them, one by one by having the whole picture in our minds as well, and like having like strong processes essentially that are coming from Web2 world to help us and support th through the process. Because like with some of the Web3 startups that are emerging currently, we see like a lack of proper management and development processes often. And I think it's also like a huge differentiator among the marketplace currently, because once you're able to set up a proper engineering and management process inside the Web3 development team, it's already a huge differentiator on this marketplace, because it's for sure definitely very young right now. Now we essentially the Q&A session. I would stop sharing my screen. I would look into chat if there are some questions. Then there is also functionality on Zoom, reactions and raise hands. If you would like to ask anything, you can essentially go there as well. And yeah, we'll just be able to have a talk with either myself or Domi. So let me check. Does anyone have any questions? Do you prefer points or hours? So internally, we usually do hours. In some cases, we do story points as well. So I would say it depends like on the project to project, and it depends on the engineering team and the engineers exactly. But usually we're doing it through hours. We work with a lot of like founders that are not technical by themselves, so they're coming from business background, and it's often easier for them to basically be presented in the hours or speak in the hours, because like user stories and user epics is another concept that they would need to understand. And yeah, it's already like a lot of things if there's like a non-tech founder to essentially be talking with a company like ours. But we work with non-tech founders a lot, so like we're structuring the process in a way that they would be understandable, because it's easier to do something difficult and it's hard to make something very simple. What numbering do you prefer? I'm not sure on this question. We usually try to make sure that like each functionality is max 8 hours of the estimation, and if it's more, we just divide it into smaller ones, and that's just a rule of thumb. But essentially, we do these parts of the estimate internally to our clients. We often just present the amount of sprints and the pricing for the sprint as well. How do you factor in other roles? Yeah, so usually that depending on the project, depending on the hours that these specialists would be involved for. So for example, for the middle project, for mid-sized project, we would often have a project manager for part-time. Mid-sized project is something like several months of development from 3 to 6. And we would just have them part-time, and we would just multiply the part-time hours by hourly rate, and we would just get the engagement after that. QA around the same thing, UI UX as well. I would say over years we figure out like the standard amount of hours that are needed for every project we're working on. And obviously when getting to work on a new project, we always estimate if the amount of hours needs to be extended, if we need any additional team members of the same expertise to be on time and certain things. So yeah, it's constantly like planning and management process, and we do often communicate with our customers on that as well. What's your favorite blockchain project you've done in your company? That's an interesting one. Let me even think. So I like when we like innovate and work on really like new stuff. One of the things that's interesting is like some of the largest NFT drops that we've done. These type of things, they're interesting because like you're at the top of the industry based on the volume of the projects and the amount of NFTs and the price, and they would be selling. At the same time, if it's like something very complex, I'm interested in metaverses or like real estate organization projects that are very complex and have like really interesting internally inside working on the whole thing from the end of the client as well. Yeah, it's very great to work on things like that. What types of projects are most suitable for blockchain solutions and which are not? I would say that's a tough and broad question to answer. There are definitely a range of projects where people just put blockchain just for the sake of it, and there are definitely industries and things where blockchain could be implemented. So usual use cases is security, decentralization, and if you would think on that, like for example, hospitals, you can do implementations like that. There are people that are saying that like government of certain countries is being implemented in the blockchain structure to make sure it's like decentralized and transparent. Like some countries, like right now, they're just not like very public about the implementation because like blockchain is still maybe they just don't want to share certain things. So there are a range of projects where you can help like default Web2 business models and transfer them to Web3. So like if you would think on like freelancing platform like Upwork, you can kind of like remove the middleman, the platform, or at least try to make it at least more fair and decentralized in the direction of the provider and the client. So you might be able like to basically have the implementation there to help both parties as well to operate in a more decentralized and standardized manner too. I would say like there's a huge field currently for that, and you would just have to test things and market proof them, and many of the things they would probably won't be accepted by the market as well. But if you would not want to do that, you can always just follow companies that have clients and customers already, like NFT marketplaces, for example. They were not doing well recently, but I think they will probably come back in upcoming months and just copy the business model, just make some things better, talk with the users of the platform, get some feedback and proof on that, and just market on this disqualification of this major platform. And yeah, it would probably be easier for the whole thing. What's the biggest mistake you made and how did you recover? That's interesting. I'm not sure if it's like business-wise or it's blockchain development-wise. Business-wise, I would probably just add business-wise is losing focus and momentum and being too arrogant to go on the vacation as well and thinking that I can take this all on. And yeah, definitely interesting thing. So I would say focus and momentum, because it's usually huge in all areas of life and in business as well. Like you tend to rest after you reach certain milestone, but the winners they rest in a way it doesn't hurt the company, or they don't rest at all. They just keep going because there enough. That's all questions in the chat. Do you have anything more? Feel free to share them, or you can raise the hand and ask questions verbally so we can talk as well. I would probably wait for like about a minute and then we can wrap up. The recording of the webinar will be sent to your email. I would also get a link for free consultation with us in terms of us actually like providing the estimate for a project or a concept or idea or something that you're working on currently. We don't do it for like each and every company. So this is essentially something that we are providing from our end as a thank you for being at the end of the webinar. If you will have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is pretty straightforward. You just send it via chat, stan@interexy.com. Thank you everyone for joining this Wednesday afternoon. If you will have any questions, feel free to come back and ask. And yeah, I wish you all a great end of the week and very nice holidays in upcoming weeks as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.